Welcome to the Still Curtain podcast. It's Monday, July 28th, and the Pittsburgh Steelers will have their first padded practice of training camp tomorrow. I'm Josh Yourish, and with the Steelers off today in Latrobe, it's a very hot one. They're getting the day off. Good news for them. I'm going to walk you through all the news of training camp so far and what it means, and then lay out my case for why these five players in particular are facing the most make or break pressure this year for the Steelers. But first, before that, I'm going to start with a few transactions that the Steelers have made around the start of camp. First, at the end of last week, this came in late last week, the Steelers signing veteran safety Chuck Clark to the roster for training camp. Clark last season played 709 snaps for the Jets. After missing the 2023 season with an ACL injury, he spent the first 6 seasons of his career with the Baltimore Ravens. That might be why his name is a familiar one to many and most Steelers fans. Predominantly in his first 3 years, he was a special teamer with nearly 1,000 special team snaps in those 3 seasons. He could factor in for the Steelers as a core special teamer, but he will likely compete with Juan Thornhill for starting safety reps next to Deshaun Elliott. The wrap on Chuck Clark, good tackler, physical safety and run defense. He's played over 600 career snaps in the slot, but primarily splits time between, free safety and box safety. He's often down around the line of scrimmage, but he can fit anywhere for the Steelers on the defensive side of the ball. And that's something that they've clearly been after, especially in the secondary. Jalen Ramsey being somebody who can play in the slot, who can play outside. That versatility, very important. Now, it's funny to say you're targeting versatile players when you trade Minkah Fitzpatrick, who began his career as like the ultimate jack of all trades, but master of none before the Steelers traded for him from Miami. Now they send him back to Miami and are looking for more versatile options, but certainly that's what they have here in Clark, who can do a little bit of everything. He's probably not going to be a surefire starting safety next to Elliott. It's unlikely. I don't know about unlikely, but he's definitely not just waltzing into a starting job with the Steelers. He's getting on the train a little bit late as it's moving. And trying to get up to speed with everything. Thornhill's been with the team. Thornhill's probably a better player at this point in their careers, though he didn't play very much with the Browns last season. The Steelers needed a body at safety. And ultimately, that's exactly what they got in Chuck Clark. This is not somebody who's raising the ceiling, but maybe elevating the floor a little bit. If you have some injuries, if Thornhill doesn't really work out, you have another veteran back there that you can feel a little bit comfortable with. So I like the signing. The Steelers needed to add somebody back there. They did add somebody back there. He doesn't really move the needle, but it's another body. And at safety, that's somewhere you can get away with replacement level players in the modern NFL. And depending on how the Steelers want to run their defense, last year they were asking Minkah to do just about everything playing the post. Very deep in their single high safety. They used single high looks the most of anyone in the NFL. Probably that'll be Thornhill's role, with Elliott down in the box around the line of scrimmage a little bit more. That's where Elliott played much last season when Minkah was the deep guy. Chuck Clark much more fits that Deshaun Elliott role, being around the line of scrimmage, working in the run fit, than, the Minkah Fitzpatrick post safety role. Thornhill's probably going to be the guy there, but just adding somebody to the mix could be really important for them as, attrition throughout the season sets in and you have injuries and players aren't performing as well. So adding Chuck Clark, he's not a guarantee to make the roster, make the 53 man out of camp, but feeling good that the Steelers made this move and recognized it was an area of need and were willing to react to it so quickly heading into training camp. The other news came today, and the source of it was the man himself, Cordero Patterson. He posted this morning, breaking news: Pittsburgh Steelers release old washed up Cordero Patterson on his day off. A little Friday reference mixed into that announcement for Cordero Patterson, who has long been a favorite of Arthur Smith throughout his multiple stops, particularly in Atlanta. Um, and last season got some major touches in major spots for the Steelers, but was never going to be cracking much of the running back rotation between Jalen Warren and Caleb Johnson. This is good news for Kenneth Gainwell. Maybe Trey Sermon, but probably not. Kenneth Gainwell, it feels like he's almost a certainty to make the roster now. It probably felt that way regardless, but now it'll likely be Gainwell returning kicks and Calvin Austin returning punts. So that's more notable in the special teams side of things. Running back Cordell Patterson was not much of a running back anymore, but was historically one of the best kick returners in NFL history. And his career is now almost certainly over if Arthur Smith is no longer interested, because Arthur Smith was the guy he would fall back to if he needed a job, the guy he was going to call up if he needed a job. Now the Steelers are letting go of Patterson. We'll see where that roster spot goes. Not likely to be an impactful one, though. Good news for Kenneth Gainwell. Not much news for the Steelers. It was unlikely that Patterson was going to make the roster this year. Changing gears a little bit before we get into some training camp notes. The Steelers announced their Hall of Honor over the weekend for the 2025 Hall of Honor class, and it's a big one. Ben Roethlisberger, Marquise Pouncey, and Joey Porter Sr. going into the Hall of Honor. Don't have strong opinions on it. Obviously, all three of those guys absolutely deserve it. Ben and Pouncey were, a tandem for quite a while, and the lasting image when those two come up, the lasting image in my head is them sitting sad on the bench, knowing that it's Pouncey's last game after the playoff loss to the Browns. Not an ideal final image. Maybe the Hall of Honor ceremony will conjure up a new one between the longtime center and quarterback combination in Pittsburgh. Ben obviously was going to get in at some point. Better sooner than later. Pouncey was likely going to get in at some point. Interesting to see Joey Porter Jr. going in there. Maybe Joey Porter Sr. is going to come up a little later in the show. That's all I have on the Hall of Honor. Just some news to get through as we, crank through things here early on in the show. The season's getting closer, so we have more stuff to talk about, more news coming out every day. Now to the training camp notes. Now, obviously, I haven't been out there to training camp just yet. I'm dying to get out there. Will get out there at some point to get a look at everything with the Steelers. And if you have any questions about the Steelers in training camp, roster battles, anything I'm talking about today, feel free to drop those in the chat. I always appreciate that going forward. Training camp notes, though, the biggest one is definitely a guy I'm going to be talking about later on the show for the make or break seasons. Broderick Jones left practice early with a soft tissue injury. Reports are that it's a groin or a hip, something around that area. Interestingly, obviously, Jones is going to be, if all goes well through training camp, and even if it doesn't go great through training camp, but if all goes and he's healthy enough in week one, he will almost certainly be the starting left tackle for the Steelers in 2025. Interestingly enough, though, after Jones went down on Sunday, sweltering day out at training camp that many longtime reporters were calling the hottest in Steelers training camp history, or at least recent history at St. Vincent College. Dylan Cook took the starting reps when Jones was done for the day, not Calvin Anderson. Obviously, the Steelers have multiple Andersons, Calvin Anderson and Spencer Anderson. Calvin Anderson figures to maybe be the swing tackle on the outside. Spencer Anderson, obviously an interior guy who plugged a lot of holes last season. When Sayamalu went down, when James Daniels went down, Miz McCormick wasn't ready yet. There were a lot of different opportunities for Spencer Anderson. Calvin Anderson, though, was likely figured to be the swing tackle. Dylan Cook goes ahead of him. yesterday with Jones out, but most reporters, including friend of the program, Brian Batko, saying it's too early to say if Cook leads the swing tackle competition. But just an interesting note with him taking over for Broderick Jones, who went out with that injury. Obviously, Isaac Seumalo is already out on the non-football injury list. He started training camp on the non-football injury list. So there was a concern about the left side of the offensive line. If you're worried about Broderick Jones making a leap in year 3 and moving over to that left side, you certainly want him to have as many reps as possible next to Isaac Seumalo. Well, that was already jeopardized by Seumalo's non-football injury that he began camp with. Now his Broderick Jones development even further in jeopardy with an injury of his own that he suffered on Sunday. It's unclear how long it's going to keep him out. Almost certainly going to keep him out on Tuesday when the Steelers put the pads on for the first time. Just seems really unlikely that they're going to try to rush him back. He needs as many reps as possible, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, but even with the, potential dire circumstances, they're not going to force him out there, risk re-injury, risk re-aggravation and a longer term issue, potentially meaning Dylan Cook or Calvin Anderson would have to start in week 1. That's the nightmare scenario. So they're going to be patient with Broderick Jones. I can't imagine he takes the field tomorrow unless everything is totally fine and it was more of a cramp than a soft tissue injury. Other news, Mike Tomlin had an interesting matchup that he mentioned he was looking forward to when the Steelers put on the pads for the first time, mentioning the backs on backers drill, which is always a fan favorite out in Latrobe, one of the most fun. He said backs on backers matchup between Kenneth Gainwell and Peyton Wilson is the one he's looking forward to the most. He mentioned Kenneth Gainwell's experience and mastery of route running out of the backfield and how Peyton Wilson is attempting to become a master of that domain in his second season. Not the one that would have jumped out to me, right? Maybe Caleb Johnson getting a matchup with Patrick Queen, something like that. But noteworthy that Tomlin mentioned those two guys. Noteworthy, especially that those comments were followed the next day by the release of Cordero Patterson. Seems like Tomlin is pretty high on Kenneth Gainwell, and maybe he'll have an increased role or a bigger role than was expected in the Steelers offense this season. Other news, rookie tight end DJ Thomas Jones carted off the field with an ankle injury. It sounds like it's long-term. There were another soft tissue injury as well, a rookie wide receiver. But DJ Thomas Jones, the tight end, is the one that sounds like it's a long-term injury, though that's not massively impactful. While impactful for his career, not massively impactful for the Steelers' outlook, considering they have Pat Freiermuth and Darnell Washington and swung that offseason trade with the Dolphins for Jonnu Smith. So loaded up at tight end. Those are going to be the tight ends. It's going to be an uphill battle for Connor Hayward to even make the roster. So DJ Thomas Jones was somebody competing for potentially a practice squad spot at most. Finally, on the early notes that we're getting out of reporters and clips and everything, two under the radar defensive players standing out. Brandon Echols, the cornerback the Steelers signed in free agency from the New York Jets. He began his career with the Jets as a depth corner. He has been impressing, had an interception in 7 shots, I believe, of Mason Rudolph on a pass intended for Darnell Washington. So he's somebody that the name keeps coming up with reporters, somebody I'll want to keep an eye on when I get out to Latrobe eventually to lay my eyes on the team for the first time. And that's interesting with the cornerback depth chart, right? Ramsey, Joey Porter Jr., and Darius Slay are all locks to make the roster. Beanie Bishop as a nickel, definitely a lock to make the roster, especially after, the splash plays last season. He wasn't as reliable as maybe you would want, but as an undrafted free agent, forcing some turnovers, being a bit of a ball hawk in the secondary, he's going to make the roster. So you have those all 4 locks. Could Echols, Corey Trice Jr., and James Pierre all be battling for just one spot? Coming out of camp last year, the Steelers kept only 5 corners out of the 10 defensive backs that they kept, which meant a lot of safeties, which is helpful for special teams play, especially if Eccles is impressing. Does that mean no Corey Trice Jr. this year? Does that mean James Pierre's walking? It's, something worth keeping an eye on, especially in Trice's case. He's somebody I know Tommy has been very high on. And obviously subscribe to the Still Curtain podcast so you can listen to his show on Wednesdays. He's been very high on Trice his entire career, even coming out of the draft. Injury issues have been the problem for the lengthy cornerback. And we saw him get a little bit of run last season when injuries cropped up for other guys. But with Eccles playing this well, it could potentially mean the end for Trice, or, a different situation at safety, maybe keeping 6 cornerbacks. Just noteworthy for how the 53 man is going to shake out at the end of training camp. Deshaun Elliott, Thornhill, Chuck Clark, and Miles Killebrew are likely locks at safety. So Sebastian Castro or a 6th corner could kind of be the competition if Eccles is making his case to be cornerback number 5. That's all the news from around training camp. Still very early days. Again, the first padded practice is tomorrow. That's when we'll start to see a little bit more. But I have a list of guys maybe to keep your eye on if you're going out to Latrobe yourself, if you're just getting excited for the preseason, making your own prognostications for the Steelers' outlook this season, or, you're just a Steelers fan and these are the guys that are going to be really, really crucial for the Steelers this season having success, but also the Steelers going forward, what the roster build looks like, what the construction of this roster looks like, where the resources are allocated. These are my 5 players that are in make or break years for themselves, but are also potential make or break players for the Steelers in 2025. So it's kind of twofold. More leaning on it's make or break for them in their careers and maybe getting an extension in Pittsburgh or seeing the end of an extension in one player's case. But also a second factor of these are players that Omar Khan and Mike Tomlin are banking on being impactful in 2025. And if they're not, it could break the Steelers. Number 1, without question, is Broderick Jones. Absolutely, Broderick Jones has massive pressure on him heading into year 3 of his career. The former first-round pick that the Steelers traded up to go get, jumped in front of the Jets, made a big, it wasn't a massive draft night trade, but a significant investment even beyond just the first-round pick, because Omar Khan saw him as a project, but one that could develop into a potential star. That has not happened. He still remains a project heading into year 3. Mark Cabali on 93.7 The Fan this morning with the Fan Morning Show said Broderick Jones is not off to a good start. He has concerns about his get off, even after Jones came into camp trimmed up and in the best shape of his life, as we like to say about all these players as they begin training camp. So Broderick Jones, yeah, he's in better shape. That's been an issue for him throughout his career, but it doesn't appear to be translating to success in unpadded practices. But Caboli, as he was talking about and other reporters have talked about Jones before his injury, was really sticking out as somebody having issues. Nick Herbig, somebody who was blowing by him in multiple drills. There are clips out there of Broderick Jones getting beaten pretty bad and Aaron Rodgers getting under pressure very quickly. Last season, Jones allowed a team high 45 pressures. Notable on the Broderick Jones coming in the best shape of his life, trimmed down a little bit. The Steelers' offensive line altogether is one of the smaller ones in the NFL. That's just to account for the zone blocking scheme, which has been, a major ethos in the NFL in recent years, although a lot of the coaches who brought that in vogue, are now going away from it because the trends are very cyclical. The Steelers are sticking to it with Arthur Smith. So that's, noteworthy. Maybe that'll help Jones in the run game and running the outside zone and stretch stuff, getting to the edge a little bit more. But so far it hasn't helped him show improvement at training camp. If you listen to all the reports from the reporters that have been there, again, Jones came into the NFL super raw. And in some ways, the Steelers failed him by switching him back and forth between left and right tackle, especially last training camp when they were prioritizing Dan Moore Jr. at left tackle, because Dan Moore Jr. is somebody who had proven and had said outwardly he didn't want to and was not capable of switching to right tackle. So Jones was the one who had to. The Steelers let Dan Moore Jr. walk for an $80+ million contract this offseason in Tennessee, which was a big surprise considering the caliber of player that he was during his time in Pittsburgh. Shows how desperate teams are for offensive linemen in general, but also shows like maybe the Steelers were right to prioritize Dan Moore Jr. over Broderick Jones. But I think that was a failure of development for him. If this is a guy you view as a project, let him play the position he's most comfortable in. You invested a first-round pick in him. That has to matter. Or else you're getting nothing back for that investment. And it looks like the Steelers could be heading towards that type of situation where Broderick Jones is just a flat-out bust. He's going to be the starting left tackle this year. He could be well suited potentially for the zone running game, and Caleb Johnson could help things because he's particularly suited for that type of running style. Aaron Rodgers is going to get the ball out very quickly. Last year, he had his quickest average time to throw of his career with the Jets at age 41 now. He's just going to get the ball out really quickly. But Jones now, his resume in the NFL, he struggled mightily through his first 2 seasons at right tackle. Last season in training camp, he was unable to beat out Dan Moore Jr., who got a big contract, but was never, in my opinion, was never even an average starting offensive tackle in the NFL. He was probably one of the worst starting offensive tackles in the NFL. Was unable to beat him out. And then Troy Fautanu, the Steelers 2024 first rounder, who missed all of training camp with an injury. The second he came back healthy, the Steelers decided they were going to split reps between the two against the Denver Broncos at right tackle. And Broderick Jones effectively became the swing tackle for the Steelers early last season before Fautanu went out for the year. And then Jones became the full-time right tackle. Heading into year 3, that's not a promising resume if it wasn't for the fact that Jones was a first-round pick who was viewed to have very high potential and maybe a longer developmental arc than most first-rounders. There wouldn't be much hope left. We're still holding out some that a move back to the left side where Jones is a little bit more comfortable, and year 3, no Dan Moore in the way, slimmed down, best shape of his life. Aaron Rodgers potentially getting the ball out quicker. Could be a breakout year for Broderick Jones. We're, as Steelers fans, largely holding out that hope because there's no other option on the roster. As I mentioned, Dylan Cook and Calvin Anderson are the options behind Broderick Jones. It's got to be Broderick Jones this year. So there's hope held out that maybe this is going to be the year it all comes together. The early signs are not there in training camp. And now this injury is going to take him off the field even longer for really important reps. So I am massively concerned about Broderick Jones and him potentially being a huge liability for the Steelers in year 3 and then not on the team in year 4. I feel like that is becoming an increasingly large possibility. The Steelers, I'm struggling deciding what lens to look at this roster through, right? Because a lot of their actions are that of a contender, but they also have 12 draft picks in next year's draft through comp picks and trades and everything, and are clearly loading up to try to draft a quarterback early in the 2026 NFL draft. So in one sense, they're in this transitional phase, and in another sense, they're in this win now contender phase, right? They're not in an all-in phase. That's disingenuous. It's not true. I've said it because that's some of their actions, but that's not true because they have so many of these picks. If they were all in and they even have more cap space, they could swing another move. They're almost all in. They're very in. They're trying to win right now. And through that lens, Broderick Jones is a huge problem. Through the transitional lens of you're trying to see what good young players are going to be long-term options on this roster as you find the answer at franchise quarterback, then okay, Broderick Jones is a worthwhile project this year. See what he looks like at left tackle. But maybe the juice isn't worth the squeeze there. It's not ever going to be. Maybe Broderick Jones is not going to be a starting NFL left tackle at any point in his career, including year 3, and the Steelers should have brought in some depth there. The issue is that's just not really available. As I mentioned, Dan Moore Jr. got an $80 million contract. Jalen Moore, a backup for the 49ers, got a massive contract from the Chiefs, and then the Chiefs went and drafted a first-round offensive tackle because that's how desperate they are. Every team in the NFL needs, almost every team in the NFL, not the Detroit Lions, but most need depth at offensive tackle. Steelers are included in that. But that's a big problem considering you spent back-to-back first-round picks on the same position. I'm optimistic about Fautanu on the other side, but 2025 is absolutely a make or break year for Broderick Jones, and it's off to a really, really bad start. Number 2 on this list for me, Joey Porter Jr. In a somewhat similar situation heading into year 3, though his year 1 was much more promising. The Steelers have Jalen Ramsey locked up for multiple years, and though his contract is one that has some outs, he's going to be on the roster for a while. But he's likely to transition to safety at some point. That frame, he played some safety in college. He's mentioned it before that he'd be willing to make that transition. It just seems like a natural progression for a player of his size, his caliber, and his age. So between he, Darius Slay, and Joey Porter, JPJ is the only possible long-term answer at the position. Last season, he took a real step back, a legitimate step back after a promising rookie year. Now, that was with the pressure of being cornerback number 1, being the potential lockdown guy, right? That's a transition, but he did not handle it well. His 17 penalties were the most among cornerbacks in the NFL, 5 more than JC Horn. His 11.6 snaps per reception ranked 53rd out of 141 corners with at least 100 coverage snaps. The year prior, his 19.7 snaps per reception ranked 5th in the NFL. And that's not an end-all be-all stat, right? It's something of a catch-all of, just how much are you out there? How efficient is the opposing offense at attacking you? Are opposing quarterbacks at going after you? So it's not an end-all be-all statistic because Patrick Peterson was 3rd in that metric in 2023, and he was bad. But he also played some safety. Steelers did some, weird 3 safety stuff that season because Peterson was aging so much. So he didn't get so many one-on-one on the outside matchups. It makes sense that there would be some noise in that statistic for him. But in 2023, with that 19.7 snaps per reception, Joey Porter Jr. ranked just above Sauce Gardner, Derek Stingley Jr., Jalen Ramsey, and Marlon Humphrey, and it was 1 spot behind Jalen Johnson. That's a list of some of the best cornerbacks in the NFL. So in limited work because it took him a while to finally get onto the field in 2023, Joey Porter Jr. was legitimately one of the best corners in the NFL. You could make an argument. Last season, that was not the case. Last season, opposing quarterback rating or opposing passer rating when targeting Porter, 90.9, 57th in the NFL among cornerbacks. 2023, 69.9, 14th. There are reasons for that regression. He was likely not going to be as good as, 5th best and 14th best in those metrics over a full season, knowing NFL offenses are so good at finding weaknesses in cornerbacks. It's one of the most difficult positions to play, and it's one of the more easy ones to attack weaknesses. You see so many times Trayvon Diggs has this massive season, right? And then he regresses in a big way the next year. Teams realize he's jumping everything. They hit him with a ton of double moves. Sauce Gardner has this unbelievable season. He looks like he's going to be the best cornerback in this generation in the NFL. Last season, teams realize he doesn't want to tackle. They start bringing him closer to the formation, running right at him, right? Forcing him to tackle in space. And he has a much worse year. It happens at cornerback. And it was going to happen for Porter, even if that wasn't the case. He was just going to be exposed more as cornerback one. But that fall off was way too drastic. And for Porter to be the long-term answer, even as a cornerback too, right? He doesn't have to be lockdown, cornerback one, like a building block of the defense. He does not have to be that. But even to be a viable starting cornerback, he's got to be better than he was last year. Too many penalties, way too handsy. And then even when he got matched up against guys like T. Higgins, who he would theoretically be a good matchup against with his long arms and his physicality, he struggled. He struggled a lot, especially in that specific matchup. So it's a really important year for Porter to prove that he is going to be a long-term part of this defense, because Mike Tomlin's going to want him to be a long-term part of this defense. His father's going into the Hall of Honor this year, right? He needs to be better, and significantly so. And I don't know that type of microscope is on him right now because of the big moves the offseason. You add DK, you flip Minka for Jalen Ramsey, you add Darius Slay. It just feels like, okay, yeah, Porter Jr. is slotted in there as one of the starting outside corners. I mean, if he continues to struggle like that, there's a chance that Ramsey and Slay are the outside guys, Beanie Bishop in the nickel, and Porter Jr. is the odd man out. If the Steelers had those options last year, you better believe there are plenty of games that would be the lineup because of the ways that Porter was struggling. So make or break year for him, absolutely. Maybe not as big as Broderick Jones. There's not quite as big of an investment, but it's pretty close. It's pretty close. Number 3 on this list of players who are in their make or break year and are make or break players for the Steelers is Calvin Austin III. Final year of his rookie deal. He hasn't yet proven to be a real wide receiver too. I saw flashes of it late last season where I started to really believe that he could be an actual real wide receiver too, especially in an offense that wants to run the ball a lot, in an offense that is tight end heavy. I started to believe it, and I'm coming into this year cautiously optimistic that Calvin Austin's going to be a legit 2. But he has a ton of pressure because Roman Wilson, who redshirted last year after being a 3rd-round pick, is potentially breathing down his neck to take away snaps in the slot, to take away wide receiver 2 snaps, right? I don't think Robert Woods is going to really take those away, but he's a viable blocker and a veteran, a savvy veteran that Arthur Smith is going to trust. Somebody has to establish themselves as a real pass catching option opposite DK Metcalf. That has to happen. And heading into the final year of his rookie deal, I think the Steelers would prefer it with Austin heading into the final year of his rookie deal. I think the Steelers would prefer it if that guy was Roman Wilson because you have more contractual control there. But if it's Austin, sign him up. Lock him up for the next quarterback to develop with a Metcalf Austin combination. That's, you know, while they're very different builds, somewhat similar players, vertical threats. I believe that there's something there with Austin. I've seen enough of it. I think he was productive enough last year in a pretty disastrous offensive ecosystem, but he'll have to prove it down the field and he'll have to prove it with yards after the catch because Aaron Rodgers, as I mentioned last season, the quickest time to throw of his career. And a lot of those throws were, like late career Ben around the line of scrimmage, quick slants. He can really still zip those, but Rodgers is worried about getting hit. He can't create the same way out of the pocket. So he's getting it out quickly. And then a lot of those throws were boundary deep balls. That's why Metcalf is a good fit. Pickens would have been a very good fit as well, but I don't know that that would have worked in the locker room. And it seems to be a big reason that the Steelers moved on from George Pickens, and I'm happy about that. I'm glad they did. I think a third-round pick was good value. But Calvin Austin is going to have a lot of opportunities streaking down the sideline. He's going to have to haul a lot of those in to make this offense work. He's going to have to create once he has the ball in his hands to make this offense work. Right? Late years of Ben, we saw it. The offense, when the quarterback doesn't want to get hit, can't really move, and wants to get the ball out of his hands quickly, the offense becomes so heavily predicated on the production of the skill players and their ability with the ball in their hands, especially late in the year when opposing defenses realize what the situation is. So some of that will be Jonnu Smith, who's great after the catch, great on tight end screens, great on quick slants, right? Some of that will be Pat Freiermuth as a possession guy over the middle, Darnell Washington too. But it's got to be Calvin Austin to bring some explosive element that I don't think will really be there otherwise, at least not on the outside. So it's a make or break year for Austin to prove that he's worthy of a contract extension to stay in Pittsburgh. But it's also, a make or break year because the Steelers need somebody to be wide receiver too. And Austin's the best bet. Number 4 on this list, as I take a drink here real quick. Keanu Benton. It may not seem like it would be a massive make or break season for Benton. He's been good, especially for a mid-round pick. He's outperformed that and has shown promise of being something much more than just a serviceable interior defensive lineman. But last season, he stagnated in his development. It was a very similar season to year one, pretty much identical pass rush win rate, pretty much identical pressure numbers, and his missed tackle rate bumped up to 15.6%, which is alarmingly high for an interior defensive line. His average depth of tackle last season was 3.4 yards downfield. For a guy that the Steelers are desperately trying to force to be a nose tackle when he's really a 3-tech, but either way is an integral part of your interior run defense, his average depth of tackle is about 3.5 yards downfield. That's a problem. That ranked 97th of 140 defensive linemen with at least 100 run defense snaps. Hayward at 2.5 ranked 82nd. First team All-Pro, Cam Hayward, one of the best run defenders in the NFL and incredibly disruptive last season, was below average in that metric as well. Now there's noise, there's different things in those types of metrics, but it's a good encapsulation of if you're holding up at the point of attack. And Benton has not been able to do that, largely because that's not the type of player he was profiled to be coming into the league, right? He's a penetrating three tech. He needs to do that more. But with Hayward and Derek Harmon now, he's pretty pigeonholed into the nose tackle role. Rotationally, he can get some reps at three technique, but the Steelers continue to want to make Keanu Benton a nose tackle, and he continues to struggle in run defense. Hayward's on his way out. Harmon's on his way up. Have heard rave reviews about Derek Harmon. No, they haven't put the pads on yet, but he's been impressing everybody at Steelers training camp. How does Benton fit in? And is he worthy of an extension after this season? Right? He's got 2 years left on that rookie deal, heading into year 3 right now. He could be eligible for an extension next offseason. The Steelers need him to be good because there's not a whole lot of depth behind Hayward, and Harmon. Are you excited about Isaiah Loudermilk? DeMarvin Leal's moved to maybe a hybrid edge kind of guy. Y.A. Black is making some noise at training camp. He's another player I actually neglected to mention in the training camp notes. Y.A. Black, a late round pick this year. I think it was 6th or 7th, but I believe it was 7th round pick out of Iowa. 6'6", 330, maybe even more than 330. Massive, big body nose tackle who the Steelers began working at three technique for some reason. But he's been super disruptive and deflecting a ton of passes, reportedly, at camp. So that's great news. Maybe Black will be a big part of the defensive line rotation and the depth on the interior, but I'm not going to bank on it for a late round pick like that. Benton has to be good in a variety of roles. Because if Black isn't going to be the full-time nose tackle, maybe he will, and problem solved, and then Benton can be fresher, can play three technique more. You can keep Hayward fresher as he gets older, rotate those three guys, Harmon, Hayward, and Benton as your three techniques and constantly be penetrating, getting after the quarterback. That would be ideal, but likely it's going to have to be Benton at nose tackle, and he's just not shown an ability to hold up there, especially against the run. So I'm concerned about the fit, the decision-making, the usage, but I'm also concerned about the player and if he can take a step forward as a pass rusher. Maybe the role is limiting that. And I think, Tommy and Shane, who have been high on Benton as well, would argue that the role is limiting that. But there has to be a higher level of production for him to justify an extension, especially on this defense that's going to be aging out a lot of these bigger contracts, right? Hayward's going to be done fairly soon, but the TJ Watt mega deals is just going to be kicking in. So you have to be wise about how you allocate resources along the defensive line. You invested a lot in Derek Harmon. Are you going to throw a real significant extension at Keanu Benton if he hasn't shown the ability to be much more than a replacement level defensive lineman and a, struggling nose tackle? Some of that's on the staff, some of that's on Benton. It'll be interesting to see how things play out for him this year, but I think it could be a real make or break season, determining if he gets an extension and determining if the Steelers defensive line is actually as elite as we think it should be. Right? From the outside looking in, this should be one of the best defensive lines in the entire NFL. Especially when you include, I'm talking about just the interior right now with Harmon and Hayward. But when you include the edges with Highsmith and Watt and Herbig, that group should be able to take over games. That group alone should be able to win you football games. It's the Steelers and the New York Giants as the best defensive lines in the NFL right now. And we know the Giants are loaded up after just adding Abdul Carter to Brian Burns and Kayvon Thibodeau and Dexter Lawrence. So if that group's really going to be elite, Benton has to be really solid. And if Benton's going to get a contract extension, he has to be even better than solid to be a long-term piece on the defensive line. And that brings me to number 5, the 5th player heading into what I view as a make or break year. And this one is somewhat unfair for the make or break moniker, right? Because he's made it. He's already gotten a big payday. He's a proven NFL edge rusher, Alex Highsmith. But considering the current construction of the Steelers defense, considering the struggles the Steelers defense has been having in recent years, especially against elite offenses, Highsmith could be potentially on his way out before he sees the end of that big contract he signed a couple years ago. He has 2 years left on that deal after this one. So 3 years. But the Steelers can get out of it after this season and save $9 million. They can get out of it after next season and save $16 million if they cut him before the final year of that deal. The Watt mega deal, it changes things. Like the cap's going to continue to go up. And I think the perspective on the Watt deal will continue to change as guys like Trey Hendrickson, as guys like Micah Parsons, as these other players sign their contracts, as Aiden Hutchinson gets paid. Watt's not going to be the highest paid defensive player in NFL history for long by average annual value. Myles Garrett got more total, but by AAV, Watt's the highest paid in history. That's not going to last long. Those deals are going to come in and probably be bigger after the precedent that Watt just sent. And the cap's going to continue to go up, so it won't be such an albatross. Hopefully Watt is good enough through the duration of the deal that it never becomes an albatross. But it does change your outlook as a franchise in terms of resource allocation along the rest of the defensive line. You're expecting $41 million of production out of Watt every year. Are you willing to pay for $20 million of production out of Alex Highsmith on the other side? Or would you prefer Nick Herbig heading into the final year of his deal and you pay him as a younger player the production he can give you opposite Watt? Highsmith's 18.2% pass rush win rate was one of the best on the team in 23. It only fell to 17.4 in 24. He was still very effective in terms of, beating his man on the line of scrimmage. He gets a ton of one-on-ones because Watt gets so much attention the other way. But his production did fall off a little bit. He went from 72 pressures to 54. He's still a very good player, but he needs to be a real difference maker to see the end of that deal, or else those savings are going to get really enticing. Now, I don't see any world in which the Steelers are paying premium quarterback money during the life of this Watt extension. So by that token, you can stomach $60 million plus being poured into your 2 edge rushers. But I've never been blown away by Highsmith. I think he's been a very good player opposite Watt. I also think Bud Dupree proved it doesn't take a special talent to be a very good player opposite TJ Watt. Even with Watt struggling last season, he just gets so much attention that it makes life much easier on the other side. And if the Steelers defense continues to get steamrolled by teams like Baltimore, by teams like Kansas City, by teams like Cincinnati, by teams like Buffalo, the best teams in the AFC, if this incredibly expensive defense continues to struggle against those offenses that it's built to stop or at least to slow down, you have to take a long look at how you're building this thing. And there are a lot of potential savings that could come from moving on from Highsmith early. And I think it's something that could happen if he doesn't blow the Steelers away this season. So he's got to have a really big year. And I think he's got to have a really big year to help reignite Watt. TJ Watt took a very tangible step back last season. There are a multitude of reasons for it. One of which is he's probably just not as elite of an athlete as he was early in his career. Highsmith being dominant opposite of him is going to alleviate a lot of that burden. Maybe Watt will get a few more one-on-ones. But Highsmith has never really been able to draw that level of attention. Maybe now with a loaded interior defensive line and Watt on the other side, he'll be able to do that. If not, I do think the Steelers could consider moving on before the end of that contract. Those are my 5 make or break players for the Steelers heading into 2025. Broderick Jones, Joey Porter Jr., Calvin Austin, Keanu Benton, and Alex Highsmith. All the notes that have come out of training camp so far, just excited that we have Steelers football to actually talk about. We're getting closer and closer to real games. This week, there is an NFL preseason football game. That's exciting. It's right around the corner. So make sure you're with us for everything by liking and subscribing yourself to the Still Curtain podcast on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcasts. We really appreciate the support, and I appreciate the work from everybody with Fansided to make this show a possibility. That'll be it for me today. I'll talk to you again next Monday, the same time, 1:30 p.m. Eastern time, live on YouTube. Come hang out with me. Until then, have a great week. And as always, go Steelers.